us. Good morning. Happy Tuesday. That's going to be hard. We usually do our webinars on Monday, so that's if you hear me say happy Monday, just ignore me. I know sometimes I know what day of the week it is. We'll get started in just one moment. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Morning. Raise your hand if you're on summer break. Yay! Congratulations for making it another year. Ooh, lots of hands raised. Brent has gone ahead and dropped that landing page and attendance form in. If you want to go ahead and fill out your attendance, we're going to give it about one more minute and then we will get started at 10:01. All right, good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. So glad you could join us today. We are here for the middle level webinar on AOR 3.1, everybody's favorite point of view and perspective in literary text. So glad that you could join us, particularly those of you who are on summer break, and it's probably like your first Tuesday of summer, and here you are, continuing to learn. So thank you for being here. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Beginning with introductions. My name is Brenna McCormick, and I am the Secondary ELA Education Associate at the State Department of Education in the Office of Assessment and Standards on the standard side of the office. I have a couple of my colleagues here with me today. If you're a frequent flyer to the ELA webinars, you'll notice we're also missing a few friends. Mandy and Casey Prince Harvey are actually out delivering a different PD today, so I have Tabitha with me, who is our middle level education associate for ELA standards. And then I even drug in a science friend. So Brent White is with us. You'll see him in the chat. He is our elementary science education associate and a good friend of the ELA team. So he agreed to help come and co-pilot today. We are happy you're here. You'll notice that Brent and Tabitha might be in the chat answering some questions, dropping some links. So feel free to reach out to either one of them if you need anything. Let's go ahead. Brent has also put in the landing page in the attendance. If you will take just a moment, complete that attendance form. I'll talk to you in just a minute about recertification credit. And in order to get recertification credit, one of the requirements is to complete the attendance form. So I want to make sure you have time to do that. And just a little note to you, Tabitha, someone just emailed me asking for the link. I forwarded it to you. If you can give that to them, please. Thank you. All right, so recertification credits. We are so excited that we have been given approval to offer recertification credits for our webinars this summer and moving forward. There are 3 requirements to receive that credit. One, that you attend live, so check that off. You're here. Participate in the chat with us. We want you to remain in attendance for the duration of the webinar, and then make sure you complete that feedback form at the end. And we will issue you 1 hour of credit per hour of webinar within the next week. You'll get us email with the certificate. So we are very glad to be able to give you a little compensation for the time that you're spending, especially here in the summer. I do want to remind you that this middle school series is a series of sets. So there will be 2 webinars on each of the standards and indicators that we're looking at. So today is part 1 of 2 of AOR 3.1. And we've kind of divided them into part 1 being the information piece, and then part 2 being the application. So part 1 today, you can expect an overview of 3.1 grades 5 through 9. We're going to look at the vertical articulation shifts and that content and complexity from 2015 to the new standards. The indicator intent, so what is actually being asked as far as student performance goes, and then difference between point of view and perspective. If you're like me, that was a hill I was willing to go down on when I was in the classroom, the difference between those two. So when we come together on June 13th, that will be the application piece. And we will look at scaffolding techniques as well as some instructional strategies for teaching point of view and perspective. So our purpose for today is to explore AOR 3.1 for grades 5 through 9, and then differentiate between point of view and perspective in order to enhance our instructional strategies and improve student outcomes. So we hope that you will walk away from this webinar today being able to clearly explain and describe what the expectation is for your grade level, and then clearly differentiate between point of view and perspective. I've got a quote for you to read, and I want you to think as you're reading how it might apply to our work today, and then hold your response and we'll waterfall them into the chat all at once. So go ahead, read, think about its application to our work today, and get your response ready in the chat. Give you about 30 more seconds, and then we'll be ready to hit enter and have our responses in the chat. How does this quote apply to our work today? All right, I'm going to count down from 3, and when I hit 1, go ahead and pop those answers in. 3, 2, 1. All right, teaching students beyond the classroom into application for their life. Yes, teach learning, not just count students as data pieces. I love this. Whitney, yes, it speaks to a lot of the behind the scenes work that we do. Unless you are a teacher or in the field of education, I don't think you will ever quite understand this part, right? The digging in, the figuring it out, the identifying the issues and finding the solutions. making connections to real life, engagement, the hard work of making the standards come alive. Very good. And it helps us grow too. I love that, Jessica. Thank you. Dr. Anderson, yes, students doing the work, transfer and release. Excellent. You know, this two-part series, summer series that we're doing, really is the deep work. We're digging deep into the content to understand what students are expected to know and be able to do, so that we can plan our instruction and assessments to reflect those expectations. So I really appreciate you all being willing to do that deep work. So our agenda for today is 3 parts. We're going to start with some key terms. Just like we do with our students before we teach new content, we want to front load some of that academic vocabulary that we'll need as we begin to explore AOR 3.1. Then we will dive into the vertical articulation and some indicator intent, instructional shifts that we may notice from 2015 to the new standards. We want to make sure that we all have that same foundational understanding as we move into part 2, which will be the application piece. Okay, so here is the vertical articulation of AOR 3.1. Brent's going to drop this in the chat for you in case you need to see it bigger, because I know it's not that big on the screen. And I want you to take a brief look at the vertical articulation of AOR 3.1 and think about what key terms really draw your attention. What terms do teachers and students need to know and understand in order to demonstrate proficiency of these indicators? So take a moment and just look the whole span from English 4 to kindergarten. What are some of those key terms? Drop them in the chat. Very good. Irony, narrator, analyze, situational and dramatic irony, perspective, point of view, identify, explain. Yes, the influence of a narrator. Very good. Unreliable narrator. That's new to our standards. So glad you pointed that out, Audra. Determine. Yes, some of those verbs, right? So I wanted you to take note of some of that vocabulary before we really dig into what each of those mean, particularly for grades 5 through 9. But before we move on, I also want to note that this indicator, AOR 3.1, is specifically with literary text. So as we discuss the key terms, we're only focusing on the definitions as they pertain to literary text. So if you want clarity on the definitions and expectations regarding key terms and informational text, we're going to do that in our AOR 4.1 webinar that's coming up. So today is all about the literary text. So before we look at what's new and expected at middle level, let's take a look at what students will come to you already knowing. So in kindergarten, students are introduced to the ideas of author and illustrator. First grade, we talk about who is telling the story. So we're not using that word narrator yet, but who is telling the story. Second grade, character's perspective. Third grade is where we introduce that narrator language. Fourth grade is where we begin with point of view, and specifically our indicators use first person and third person. Those are the only two points of view that are included in indicator language. So my question for you is, why is it important to know what students have already been taught? And you can unmute or you could drop an answer in the chat. We know what to build on. Very good, Jessica. Okay, Latrice, you hit the nail on the head. It's all about that rigor, right? Make sure we're providing Yes, Allison, great question. So, just a heads up, you will get, I will follow up with an email with the slide deck as well as a recording of this webinar. So you'll get that. We need to take them further. Absolutely, Mariana. Great. Point here is that you can't assume they've really learned all the terms or remember what they mean, so you need to review. And that is such a good comment, and I'm going to stop for a moment and touch on that because it's something that we've been talking about a lot in all of our professional development, is that you're right. Students are going to come and have forgotten things that they have learned or been taught before. And it is important to provide that review time, but it's also important that we do move on to the grade level expectation. I used to be a middle level intervention teacher. And I always say that one thing that I would do very differently if I was to go back into the classroom is make sure I was teaching and exposing my students to grade level expectations every single day. In my attempt to make my students feel successful, I often handicapped them. And I never really pushed them toward grade level expectations because I only taught them at their level, if that makes sense. So I encourage you to spend a day, a half day, a mini lesson on the review, but really push that whole tier 1 instruction to be grade level instruction and pull the kids who need that extra support for your tier 2, your small groups, but really, really make sure that all students do get exposure to that grade level expectation. So we're going to look more at those specific grade level expectations later, but it is important to stop and consider, like Latrice said, that rigor and the performance expectations at each grade level. Often, and this was me in the intervention classroom, we get stuck in the identify, describe, define stage, right? And we never move beyond that. So when you look at the key terms in this way, you'll notice, for example, point of view includes both first person and third person. That's introduced in 4th grade. Subsequent grades may review those terms, but it won't be necessary to spend time in the identification, the description, the definition stages. We're going to move past that to a deeper rigor. So I'm really glad that y'all brought that point up. So let's take a look at 3 of the key terms from K4. Narrator, point of view, and perspective. Brent's going to drop a document in that has the full definitions for each of these 3 words, narrator, point of view, and perspective. I'm going to put up an abbreviated version, and I'm going to give you about a minute to look through these terms. And I want you to think about maybe misconceptions that you've heard or had regarding these terms and how the definitions help clarify any of those misconceptions. So I'll give you about a minute to think, and then we'll drop in the chat some responses. All right, I'd love for you to put in the chat or unmute and talk to me about maybe some misconceptions that have you've heard over time or had, and how this helps. Carla, yes, the point of view and perspective are not interchangeable terms. Whitney, I like that too. Yeah, that students can understand when that better. Point of view is defined as the type of narrator. Absolutely, Latrice. There are curriculums out there that use them the same. So we have to make sure that we're teaching students the difference, because our state assessments are based on our state indicators, and we know that they are different. Very good. A great point of reference, absolutely. And I don't know if I said this, but these terms are from our glossary that was written specifically for our state standards and indicators. So if you have not seen our glossary or used it, it is a wonderful tool. I'll give you the link in just a minute, but I think it's also on your landing page. When the definitions were crafted for the glossary, they were not crafted using dictionary.com. Okay, we didn't ask Webster what the definitions were. We wrote the definitions for the most part ourselves in conjunction with our development partners. We wanted to make sure that every definition was specific to the intent of our indicators. Thank you, JD. So it's a definite tool that you want to bookmark, print it out, have it so that you have access to the indicator definitions. Thank you, Brent, for dropping that in. All right, so now that we know what students already have, let's look at what we are responsible as middle level teachers to introduce. Now, some grade levels are not going to introduce new vocabulary. Those grade levels may just introduce new skills using vocabulary that students are already familiar with. And we're going to talk about that skills progression in just a moment. But right now, let's just look at the vocabulary. So in 5th and 6th grade, there's going to be no new vocabulary introduced. But when we get to 7th grade, we're going to introduce an unreliable narrator. And this is like brand new to our indicators. So that comes up in 7th grade. In 8th grade, you'll notice suspense and dramatic irony. You'll also notice that suspense is mentioned in AOR 5.1 in 8th grade as well. And then we have in English 1, so our 9th graders typically, or maybe our 8th graders, humor and situational irony. So those are the terms that are introduced in the middle level. This means that students have never had these before. They've never seen them before. A 7th grade teacher has to teach unreliable narrator from the ground up. Does that make sense? We're good? Okay. So let's look at these new vocabulary pieces, the unreliable narrator, suspense, dramatic situational irony, and humor, and see what they mean. So we'll start with unreliable narrator. This is our glossary definition, and I've just picked 2 texts that have an example of an obviously unreliable narrator. If you're familiar with either of these texts, we've got Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Drop in the chat what makes that narrator unreliable. And Mariana, I see your question. I'll answer that in just a moment. Latrice, shorten to the point. He is insane, right? Telltale Heart is one of the best examples of an unreliable narrator because he is insane, mentally ill. That's right. Absolutely. And in Huckleberry Finn, he's unreliable because he's naive. He misreads situations, creating dramatic irony. He doesn't quite get the world around him, right? So the perspective is biased. Yeah. So your unreliable narrator is a narrator who misleads the reader, either intentionally or unintentionally. They might withhold information or purposely misdirect the reader. And oftentimes it is because of like psychological issues, character flaws, or a circumstance that happens in the text. I would love to know if you can think just off the top of your head, what are some other texts for grades 5 through 9 that might include an unreliable narrator? Anybody think of anything? Kill a Mockingbird, The Cask of Amontillado. Yes. Oh, Monica, Tabitha will love that. That's her favorite book. The Outsiders. Very good. It's a little bit above, I think, grades 5 through 9, but one of my favorite short stories of all time, The Yellow Wallpaper. Landlady Ingrid, also one of my favorite short stories, talking about a crazy person, right? Love that. These are great examples. All right, I'm going to go back to a question that was in the chat before we move on. It was asked, where or when does omniscient, limited, and objective point of view come in? And the answer is those are not specifically mentioned in our indicators. So the only two point of views are first and third. Anything else is not accessible because it's not in our indicators. Now, if you have students who need extension, who are ready to move forward, to push forward, absolutely put those things in there. But so that you know, only what is in our indicator language can be assessed. So you would not get to EOC, to a SC Ready, and have a question about, second person point of view, because it's not in the indicators. So hope that clarifies a little bit for that question. All right, we had 4 other terms that were mentioned brand new in middle school: suspense and dramatic irony, humor, and situational irony. Again, I'm going to give you an abbreviated definition for these, but Brent has dropped in the full definition. I'd love for you to just take a moment, look at the definitions of these words. And then your reflection here is to just choose one of the terms. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to tell me, how does whatever term you picked relate to perspective in literary text? So give you about 2 minutes to think through that. Okay, go ahead and pick your term, which one you want to focus on, and think about how that term correlates to perspective. Monica, great example. Very good. Andra, love that. Absolutely. Tina, that's a good point. What I think's funny might not be funny to you, right? That happens to me a lot when I try to make jokes in professional development. And people are like, not picking up what you're putting down. So, or if you have small children who do not think you're funny, right? Love this. Good. And this is the question you can ask your students, right? Like, here's a definition. What does this have to do with perspective and what we're learning? Excellent. So these terms, along with unreliable narrator, again, are important to middle level teachers in particular, because you're the ones responsible for disseminating that information for the very first time. And so my question as we wrap up this just first section on these foundational terms is, why is it important to fully and clearly understand these key terms? And how is that going to impact your planning and instruction and classroom assessment? And you can unmute or you can respond in the chat. Ingrid, yeah. Good job. Yeah, Jennifer. We want to build that background knowledge. We want to make sure that we're teaching to the intent of the indicator. Classroom assessments are often a soapbox for me, how important it is that we are assessing our students to the intent of the indicator, and how important it is that we've instructed to the intent of the indicator so that our assessments are relevant. It all needs to be aligned for us to be making sure that students are getting what they need to be successful at the state level on state standardized testing. That's a great point too, that if you don't quite understand the terms, you might not collect and identify the examples accurately. You might not be choosing materials appropriately. I love that. Cannot clearly communicate to students something that you don't quite understand. There's a lot of really subtle nuances in this language. Common language. That's another thing I love about the glossary, is that it provides that foundational understanding for all students, whether you're in Greenville or Horry or Aiken, no matter where you are, you're getting the same definition. By not clarifying and clearly defining the terms, yes, their student understanding is going to be confusing. Building continuity. Absolutely. These particular terms are often misinterpreted, and we assume students do or do not know them. So providing that clarity alleviates misconceptions that have been built previously and those that may come later. So excellent responses. Now that we all kind of have that foundational understanding of the terms that our students come to us knowing and the ones that we're responsible for introducing, we're going to take a look now at what does the indicator actually say. What are those rigor expectations? How has this indicator shifted from what was expected in 2015 standards? So what you're seeing here is an excerpt from Appendix B. We'll put that in the chat just so that you have it, but it's the vertical articulation of our indicators. And I have my first question is, what do you notice about the grade level that you primarily serve? So pick one if you serve multiple, but take a look and read that indicator, AOR 3.1, for your grade level. You can drop in the chat, what's the big thing that sticks out? What do you notice? Whitney, good. Develop and contrast characters. Got that unreliable narrator in 7th grade. Jean, yeah, I think that is a concept that students find interesting. Shifts in narrators, shifts in point of view. Excellent. Multiple narrators. Katie, that's a great point, that for 7th grade teachers that will recommend students to English 1, it's important to note the 8th grade standard, so it won't get missed in the jump up. And we actually are going to talk specifically about that later in the presentation. So thank you for bringing that up. Excellent. So that also is a great segue into thinking about what comes before and after your grade level, and why it's important to know what comes before and what comes after, not just your grade level. I know I was often guilty of, hand me a standards document and what am I going to? Exactly what I teach, right? So why is it important that we know that? JD's already mentioned one point. You got to know, if you've got students switching from 7th grade to English 1, what are they missing? And I think some of you mentioned earlier to a question is that idea of identifying gaps, knowing what students were missing. How do we, go back and reteach those students who may not come to us ready for that?
And one of the biggest ways to blow a kid's mind is to talk about what they learned or were supposed to learn about last year. And like, you know what we learned last year? Well, yeah, that's important.
Right? Like, we didn't learn that. No one ever said that. I didn't talk. And if you know what the sixth grade teacher knew and you're a seventh grade teacher, woo! Absolutely, Ingrid. Filling in those gaps over the next couple of years, it's kind of like the elephant in the room. But it is what it is. Anytime there's new standards, there's going to be places where there are gaps because we're introducing a lot of brand new content, not a lot, but some brand new content in our indicators at different places that it hadn't been before. So it is going to take a couple years to really fill in those gaps and make sure students are prepared. So if we take this document that I'm showing you now is an excerpt from the Vertical Articulation with Indicator Insights, and that is one of our support documents. It has that same Appendix B articulation, but then on the right-hand side, it also includes the Indicator Insights. It's a great tool. So we're going to break down the intent of each new indicator. And then on the next slide, we'll notice any shifts from 2015. So we'll begin with grade 5, work our way through grade 9, and really dig in pretty deeply to these indicators. So remember, part 1, today's webinar is all about the what, so that we fully understand the indicator and how our planning and instruction and assessment may need to be adjusted. And then part 2, in 2 weeks, will be the how, the instructional practices you can use to teach to the intent of the indicator. Another thing I want to say before I show you what's under this rigor box is that we know that rigor is not dependent on the verb in an indicator, right? Oftentimes the rigor is what happens next, right after the verb. However, it is important to identify and understand the expectations of performance at each grade level. And each of those terms are going to be included in the rigor column and is defined in the glossary. And whenever you see a word, a definition, if it has a bolded word within it, that word is also defined in the glossary. So we're just laying down some expectations here. So what we're calling our rigor here is that verb, right? Explain, which is defined in our glossary as to make an idea or concept clear by describing it in detail. So our 5th grade teachers are going to be asking students to explain the influence of point of view on how events are described and how an author reveals characters' perspectives. If you're looking at the indicator insights, you'll notice that it reminds you that the glossary has definitions for both point of view and perspective. So how has this shifted from 2015? So if we take our new indicator and line it up next to the 2015 correlation, I want you to think through the lens of like developing new plans or possibly revising the instructional plans you already have created. Where are the similarities? Where are the differences? Where might you need to adjust what you already have? So I'm going to stop talking for a moment and give you a few minutes to think about that. As you notice, you're welcome to drop your thinking in the chat. Yes, Whitney. So we've got maybe some more clarity in the language for our new standards. It's concise, you know exactly what students are expected to know. Are there any big differences between the two? Jessica, I think maybe you must have been to one of our webinars before. That citing evidence has it's become an overarching expectation. It's how we do business in ELA, right? We should always be doing those 6 expectations. All right, Ingrid, there's a difference, right? Comparing and contrasting the reader's point of view to that of the narrator or the character. It's a big difference there. Okay. So if that's something that you have in your 5th grade lesson plan repertoire, we don't really need it anymore. So we can focus on what exactly is expected. Excellent. All right, let's look at 6th grade. Same structure. We're going to talk about the rigor, content, and indicator insight first. So we've got determine and explain are those 2 performance expectations. We're going to be looking at content, the impact of multiple narrators, the impact of shifts in point of view, and the impact of shifts in perspective. And then your indicator insight states that perspective leads to irony in English 1. And I've included this definition of irony here. And I wonder what your thoughts are, is why is it important for a 6th grade teacher to know that perspective eventually leads to irony in English 1? Absolutely, Whitney. Absolutely. Enrichment, vertical articulation, backwards design planning, enhancing rigor, all the things, Jennifer. Yes, all the things. My first thought was that vertical articulation and thinking, that's probably the most important thing about our new standards is that vertical articulation, knowing that you've got to have this step, and if you don't, this step's never going to happen. And so if we know in 6th grade what's coming, we can enrich our high flyers. We can make sure the foundation is set for those who are on grade level and enhance the rigor where needed. So that is excellent. So let's look now at the new versus 2015 here. Same questions, where are the similarities and where are the differences? Shifts of narrator. Lose that cite textual evidence again because it's become an overarching expectation. Narrator, simpler language, and then again, no compare contrast. Students are expected to know the multiple narrators, not the development of them. Very good. Easier to understand. That makes my heart happy that there's some clarity. So you can see 6th grade teachers, what may need to come out of your lessons and maybe where your focus might need to shift. All right, let's look at grade 7. So again, good, Jennifer. So I got distracted by that comment. So again, our rigor, we've got explain, but now we also have analyze. Okay. So we are really jumping up in rigor here. We'll come back to that analyze definition in just a second and look at the content. We've got influence of narrator, unreliable narrator, narrative shifts in point of view, how point of view is used to develop perspective and characters, and how point of view is used to contrast perspective and characters. Where are my 7th grade teachers at? Just give me a hey. All right. This is a big jump, guys. Look at all these 7th grade teachers. I love it. You've got a lot on your plates here, right? So will any provided resources include short stories with multiple narrators? Good question, Allison. That I'm not entirely sure because I don't know what's in every single one of our high quality instructional materials. But my first piece of advice would be to look through there, and if you don't find any, let us know. Our team is really going to start digging into all the high quality instructional materials that have been adopted across the state so that we can continue to help support and fill in some of those gaps. So if you notice something like that and you're like, oh, this isn't in here, I need something, that's a great thing that we would love to know. So your indicator insight again is that perspective leads to irony. And so let's go back to this definition of analyze. Prior to the glossary that was written, I often would look at the word analyze and think, what does that even mean? Anybody else ever think like, how do I know if a student is analyzing something? What does analysis actually include? So we have right, like, I don't know what that even means. So what I love about these standards and the glossary is that it tells us exactly what analyze means. So in this case, to this indicator, if you look at the highlighted parts of the definition, to explore text critically by considering perspective, point of view, and how these elements function individually in a text as well as how they interconnect. Now, if you'll notice, there's a lot of other things going on in this definition of analyze. You've got craft, structure, purpose, vocabulary, diction. When you're teaching to an indicator and you look up a definition like this that has multiple pieces, you only have to teach to the part that matches your indicator, if that makes sense. Like, no one's expecting you to also teach diction here and vocabulary and structure unless you're pulling in another indicator that also has those things, right? So in this particular grade 7, when they're analyzing, we are analyzing just the perspective and point of view piece. Okay, so sometimes when I look at that, I feel overwhelmed by how much is in analyze, but we don't have to do all that at one time, right? Right now, the indicator says point of view, perspective. That's where our analysis is. So I hope that gives our 7th grade teachers a little breathing room. Absolutely, Jean. And Jean, one thing that I did in a like a mock lesson, if you've ever been in a webinar of ours on the cross-check method, where it's like breaking down indicators and kind of writing a unit from that, I actually took the definition from analyze, and this was like a English 3 example, I think, and turned that definition into a rubric, right? So I wanted students to do analyze the craft, analyze the structure, analyze the purpose, and that shows me they can do all the things. So I love the clarity in the definitions as well. So looking at grade 7, new versus 2015, we're going to do the same thing. What are the similarities and what are the differences? Whitney, yeah, we don't even have perspective. And honestly, in like 7RI 11.2, I'm not sure they didn't mean perspective there. They said point of view, right? Uh, absolutely. We got the unreliable narrator. Very good. The influence of the narrator rather than how the author develops point of view. I love that point, that idea of analysis allows students to be more flexible in showing their understanding. Great point. The old standards were very similar to 6th grade, and the new ones show an increase in rigor, a real specific increase in a big increase in rigor. 7th grade teachers, absolutely. All right, let's look at 8th grade. We're getting near the end. Oh, Jessica, that makes my heart so happy. There are so many non-essay ways to assess this. And if you're even remotely interested in writing, even if you're a middle school teacher, not a high school, we're doing a great writing series right now for secondary. And we actually have one this afternoon on argumentative writing. And that's like the crux of it, is not everything has to be an essay, right? Essays are important. Yes, still teach them, but not everything has to be an essay. Love it. So grade 8. Again, we have analysis. Our content is, how does point of view create suspense and dramatic irony? And then how perspective creates suspense and dramatic irony. And then you'll notice that this one has no indicator insight. And I did want to point out that ELA in our document, we only included indicator insights for indicators that could be better understood with insights to maybe that could be relevant and would help. A definition for terms within that specific indicator, or either connections to later language or prior language. And not every indicator needed that. So you'll notice that every once in a while there is no indicator insight. I do want you to notice that within the content here, instruction is not limited to, but it must include suspense and dramatic irony to meet the expectations of the indicators. So it kind of goes back to that question we had earlier about, like, where does, second person point of view or objective, where does that come in, or omniscient? And it's not that you can't teach it, it's just that you have to teach what's here. And then if you want to go further, that's awesome, but it won't show up on an assessment. Looking at our crosswalk here, where are the similarities and where are the differences? Versus dramatic irony. That's right, Jessica. Yeah, humor moved up to English 1. I think, in my head, I think about that comment where humor can be so different, based on your specific humor. And it makes me think that, like, I feel like dramatic irony is a little bit more concrete than humor. Yeah, absolutely, Latrice. That's what I was getting at, right? That it's an abstract concept, right? Good. We're not analyzing the author's choices. Very good. It's more concise. And then finally, that last grade level that we're looking at, English 1. Again, we're at that analysis level. Your content includes suspense through differences in perspective, humor through differences in perspective, situational and dramatic irony through differences in perspective. and there is no indicator in sight. You may have noticed this is the first indicator that we see perspective by itself. There is no point of view in this indicator. So my question to you is why? How does that middle level work, including point of view, support this shift to now we are only talking about perspective? I think the reasoning is there. Yeah, Jennifer, absolutely. They should, capital letters, Jessica. You have that foundation, absolutely. And again, I think it's kind of like the humor versus dramatic irony thing. Point of view is very cut and dry, right? Like it's either it is first or it is third. That's it. But once you get into perspective, that's a little bit more abstract, right? We've got that foundational. We're moving into something a little more abstract. Absolutely. Very good. Great responses. I'm going to have to go back and read all of those. Last time, let's look at the shift from the new or from the old to the new. What are the similarities and where are the differences? Allison, I love that perspective that, as students get older, they're starting to look into the real world. Absolutely. Life experiences, cultural exposure. The real world isn't about point of view, but it's about perspective. That is stealable, tweetable. Good job. I might steal that like that. Hey, that's how we got our verbiage where we say the business of doing ELA, that's our overarching expectations. I have long forgotten who said it, and I really apologize if you're in the meeting, but someone else said that and I stole it. So if you hear that pop up, real world isn't about point of view, I'm giving you credit ahead of time. Excellent. Whitney, that's exactly the kind of questions that I used to ask when I was teaching is what even is strong and thorough evidence? Yeah, absolutely. Love it. Um, my first bet now always is to, well, what does the glossary say? What does the glossary say? And 9 times out of 10, that word's going to be defined. So earlier, I believe it was JD that mentioned that thought of the fact that we've got 7th grade students who are skipping 8th grade ELA and going into English 1. So if we look at the 8th grade expectation next to the English 1 expectation, what considerations will need to be made for those 8th grade students taking English 1, and how is that going to impact that teacher planning and instruction? Kind of, it was kind of answered earlier, partially, making sure we don't lose piece. All right, so maybe our 7th grade teachers who are teaching those students that we know are going to be moving into English 1 include suspense and dramatic irony. Absolutely, Jessica. So suspense and dramatic irony, we need to make sure. Whitney, that's excellent. Teaching both grade standards. And we have been asked before about like a compaction document that puts them both together. And at this time, right, Jessica, at this time, we are not releasing one of those. It's really a school district decision on how you want to address that. But that's exactly how a lot of places handle it, is to make sure, you know, where the difference is, fill in the gap, teach them both, like compacted curriculum. Very good. All right, so I want you to now reflect for a moment because I inundated you with a lot of thinking and information. Tell me something new you have learned, what you're thinking about now based on the new learning, and what is your next step. Allison, love that. What really makes my heart happy is that this is a middle school session and you set small groups. We don't always see that once we're past 5th grade, and I love it. Awesome, Jennifer. Thank you. Yes, having those examples ready. Making sure teachers understand the difference between a point of view and perspective. I completely agree, Ingrid, that there has not always been a real differentiation between the two. Love that next step, Latrice, making sure that we are teaching perspective, letting our grade level members, team members know those key changes and key terms. It's a great question, Tina, and something that, you know how literally will keep me up at night sometimes thinking about classroom assessments. When I said it was a soapbox, it's a soapbox. Is, you know, oftentimes, yeah, we'll change our instruction, but I'm still going to use that test I used last year, right? I ain't writing a new assessment. And that's not okay, right? We have to go through the planning, the instruction, and the classroom assessment. They all need to be aligned. Love that, Jessica. Shifting our knowledge checks into different writing experiences. And Jessica, if you're not already signed up, I really encourage you to come to these high school writing series we're doing, or watch the recordings later, because I think there's going to be some adaptable material in there. Go down to middle school. Yeah, Mariana, that's a great point, is that, you know, even at me, I did this when I was in the classroom. I was teaching omniscient, limited, I was all the things. And really, it's just a lot. And we've got students who are ready for that and can handle it. But I don't want to spend time on that with my students who barely can get first and third, right? Excellent. You using the glossary when planning lessons. Absolutely. Shifting your I can. Yeah. Especially with the new standards aligned textbooks. Yep. Vertical alignment. Yes, Dr. Anderson. Monica, I love that as well, about thinking about the resources that you're currently using, your short stories, your novels. How do we teach those skills through the text that we're choosing? Oh, good, Jessica. You're signed up. Good. You're going to love it. More vertical planning. That is a great question, Allison. So will you or someone from the SCD email when all the webinar videos are posted? So we have what is called a professional learning library. Tabitha, if you could get that link for me, she's going to put it in the chat. And as we kind of update the professional learning library in batches, so at the end of the summer, what we'll do is take all of those recordings and update them here. All of our spring sessions have already been added to that professional learning library. It's all in one place. I will tell you, we do have the Office of Assessment and Standards has a YouTube channel playlist. It's not super easy to find, but if you email me, I can send you that. They're all on there. And if at any point you're like, gosh, I wish I had the link to blah, 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 just email us. We'll send it to you. All right, I think I got all those questions. And you guys, you're welcome. We're finishing up early. We just have a couple more slides, but you'll still get your full certification credit for being here. So let's hop into some clarity and closure. Today's purpose was to explore 3.1 for grades 5 through 9. And differentiate between point of view and perspective to enhance those instructional strategies, improve student outcomes. So another question I have for you is, tell me a way this purpose was met. Hopefully we met it in at least one way. Thank you, Audrey. Yep. Excellent, Whitney. Vertical progressions, Monica. Yes. Thank you, Ingrid. You're welcome, Tina. Yes, clear definitions, clarity. Love that. And just for some funsies, I want you to gift me some feedback. Tell me how you're feeling. Go to that little gift button right there at the bottom of your chat. Type in how you're feeling and pick a gift that you like. Oh, yeah. Loving that. Oh, Mandy, it doesn't have a gift button. Tina's giving us hand claps. I like it. Oh, it's okay if you don't have one. These are funny. Look at that little kid. Excellent. I just appreciate you all so much. Taking your time, taking your time out of your summer for most of you, to spend some time learning. We are just overwhelmed sometimes by how wonderful the teachers are in our state and all the work that you put in. None of us are so far from the classroom that we forget how exhausting it is. So thank you. Thank you for continuing to participate in these. Tabitha has Tabitha has put in the chat the link to our professional learning library. So that's the place you can go as we upload webinars that have already been recorded. You're welcome, Dr. Anderson. If you will take just a moment to provide me some feedback, and if you remember that in order to get your recertification credit, we need you to submit the feedback form. Brent has just put in the link to the rest of the summer webinar series for middle level. If you haven't signed up for all of them and now you want to be, you can go sign up there. The high school ones are also in that same form if you want to attend those. That's a perfect one, Nadra. And then he just put in the feedback survey. So if I'll give you some time to complete that. Drop any lingering questions that you might have in the chat or include them on the feedback form so that we can address them in the next 3.1 webinar on June 13th. And, oh, let's see if I can fix it. And then I will listen and linger, but let me make sure that this feedback form is ready to go for you. Should be. Let's see, let me put it in again. Oh, okay, thank you. And thank you to my colleagues, particularly Brent, for jumping in and helping the ELA team today. Tabitha holding strong for us who are here. You're welcome, Carla. Thank you. And I'm so glad you were able to get logged in. Thank you, Whitney. Thanks, Lauren. Have a great rest of your day and week. Some of you will see this afternoon. Jessica. Yes, Whitney, you'll get another email. Yeah, you'll get a reminder probably the day before the next webinar with another link. Yay! Thanks, Latrice. Thank you. Join us for our next, our June 13th, and we're going to talk about the application and instruction portion of AOR 3.1. Yes. Yep. Off the chart.